The old steam engine lurched forward, its horn wailing into the night. Rain lashed against the windows of the lone passenger car, blurring the desolate landscape outside. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of damp velvet and something ancient, something unsettling. John, a young journalist chasing a forgotten story, gripped his notepad tightly. He was on the 11:59 to midnight express, a train whispered to be haunted, a ghost train. This was his chance to prove the rumors true, to make a name for himself. As the train picked up speed, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks began to sound like a heartbeat that seemed to echo John's own rising anxiety. He glanced around the empty carriage, his breath catching in his throat. He wasn't alone. At the far end, shrouded in shadow, sat a figure. John couldn't make out any details, but he could feel eyes on him, watching his every move. A shiver ran down his spine, and in that moment he knew this was no ordinary train ride. This was the beginning of a descent into terror. Hours crawled by, each tick of the clock a hammer blow on John's nerves. The figure remained motionless, an ominous silhouette against the flickering gaslight. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a banshee, and through its mournful cry, John swore he heard whispers. Faint at first, barely audible, they seemed to seep from the very walls of the train. They spoke of despair, of a tragedy long past, of souls lost and searching. The temperature in the carriage plummeted, a bone-chilling cold that even the train's heating system couldn't combat. John pulled his coat tighter around himself, his heart pounding against his ribs. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, swirling around him like the wind outside. He tried to ignore them, to rationalize them as a trick of his imagination, but deep down, he knew the truth. This train, this journey, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. He was trapped in a nightmare, a waking horror that tightened its grip with every passing minute. John needed answers, a lifeline in this sea of fear. He decided to confront the conductor, the only other soul he had seen on this accursed train. The conductor, an old man with eyes that held the weight of centuries, listened to John's frantic story with a weary sigh. "The whispers, you say?" he muttered, his voice a low rasp. "Aye, they're always there. The echoes of what happened, of what this train carries." He paused, his gaze fixed on John, a strange intensity burning in his ancient eyes. "This train," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "it doesn't carry the living. It ferries the lost, those who met their end on this very line." He pointed a gnarled finger towards the figure at the end of the car, and they're always looking for company. The conductor's words hit John like a physical blow. He was trapped on a ghost train, surrounded by the restless dead. The figure at the end of the carriage, the whispers, the bone-chilling cold, it all made terrifying sense now. The revelation hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. John's mind reeled, struggling to grasp the terrifying reality. He was no longer just a journalist chasing a story, he was a prisoner in a spectral realm. The train lurched violently, the lights flickering erratically, plunging the carriage into intermittent darkness. John's heart hammered in his chest. Each time the lights returned, the shadows seemed to have shifted, grown more menacing, more alive. He glanced towards the figure at the end of the carriage. It remained motionless, but John could feel its presence now, cold and hungry, feeding off his fear. The whispers intensified, a chorus of tormented souls, their voices filled with an unspeakable sadness. John felt a wave of despair wash over him. He was trapped, hurtling towards an unknown destination with no escape from the horrors that surrounded him. Section 5. A Ghastly Presence. John watched in horrified fascination as a spectral figure materialized from the shadows beside him. It shimmered, translucent, a ghastly echo of a human form. Its eyes, hollow sockets in a skeletal face, burned with a cold, ethereal light. The apparition reached out, its touch sending a jolt of icy terror through John's body. He recoiled, his heart pounding against his ribs, his breath catching in his throat. The figure leaned closer, its voice a chilling whisper that seemed to slither directly into his mind. "We were once like you," it hissed, its spectral breath washing over John's face. "Lost souls searching for a way out. Now we are bound to this train, forever in transit, forever seeking solace." The figure's words, laced with an eternity of suffering, sent chills down John's spine. He was trapped with them, a living being caught in the undertow of their spectral existence. Section 6. The True Cost of Passage. "What do you want?" John choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. The ghostly figure drifted back, its form flickering in the dim light. "We seek release," it moaned, its voice a symphony of sorrow. A way to break free from this infernal locomotive. It turned toward the front of the train, its spectral form seeming to dissolve into the shadows. "But the passage requires a sacrifice," it whispered, its voice echoing through the carriage. "A life for a life." John's blood ran cold. He understood the unspoken threat, the chilling bargain being offered. His life, his very essence, was the price of their freedom. The weight of their collective gaze pressed down upon him, heavy with desperation and malice. Section 7. Trapped in terror. John was trapped in a cage of his own fear, the walls closing in around him. The other passengers, their forms shifting in and out of focus, watched him with a mixture of curiosity and malice. He was a plaything, a pawn in their spectral game. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had to get off this train to escape the clutches of these tormented souls. But the doors were locked, sealed tight as if by an unseen hand. He raced to the windows, his fingers scrabbling at the latches, but they wouldn't budge. Panic welled up inside him, choking him, threatening to consume him entirely. He was trapped, hurtling towards an unknown destination with no way out. Section 8. A desperate gamble. John stumbled back from the window, his eyes darting around the carriage, searching for any means of escape. His gaze fell upon the emergency brake, a rusty lever at the end of the car. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was his only hope. He pushed past the spectral passengers, their forms parting before him like smoke. Their eyes followed his every move, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. They knew what he was planning, and they wouldn't let him escape so easily. As John reached for the lever, a cold hand clamped down on his shoulder. He spun around to find himself face to face with the ghostly figure that had first spoken to him. Its eyes burned into his, filled with a terrible, desperate hunger. Section 9. Facing the unknown. "You cannot escape your fate," the apparition hissed, its voice a chorus of whispers. "You are bound to us now, just like all the others." John struggled against the spectral grip, but it held him fast. He could feel his strength draining away, his hope flickering like a dying candle in the wind. He looked into the apparition's eyes, saw the endless abyss of its despair, and knew that he was fighting a losing battle. But even in the face of oblivion, a spark of defiance ignited within him. He would not go down without a fight. He would not let them win. Gathering all his remaining strength, he wrenched himself free and slammed his fist down on the emergency brake. Section 10. The final destination. The train lurched violently, the screech of metal on metal echoing through the night. John braced himself, his heart pounding against his ribs as the carriage tilted precariously. The lights flickered and died, plunging the train into darkness. Chaos erupted around him. The spectral passengers screamed, their voices filled with rage and despair, as the train careened off the tracks and into the unknown. John closed his eyes, accepting his fate, as the world dissolved into a cacophony of sound and fury. When John finally opened his eyes, he found himself lying in a hospital bed, his body battered and broken. Doctors and nurses bustled around him, their voices a distant murmur. He had survived the crash, the sole survivor of the haunted train. Section 11. Epilogue. But some wounds run deeper than flesh and bone. John was haunted by the memories of that night, the ghostly faces of his fellow passengers forever etched into his mind. He left the world of journalism behind, unable to escape the horrors he had witnessed. He lived the rest of his days in the shadow of the haunted train, his nights plagued by nightmares, his days consumed by the chilling knowledge that some things are best left undisturbed. The final destination of the train, and the fate of its spectral passengers, remained a mystery. But one thing was certain, the legend of the haunted train would live on, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of reality.